Gentlemen, I have a plan. It's called blackmail. As you know, the royal family of Britain are the wealthiest landowners in the world. Either the royal family pays us an exorbitant amount of money, or we make it seem that Prince Charles has had an affair outside of marriage and therefore would have to divorce.
Prince Charles did have an affair. He admitted it, and they are now divorced.
Right, okay, people, you have to tell me these things, all right? I've been frozen for 30 years, okay? Throw me a frickin' bone here. I'm the boss. Need the info. Okay, no problem. Here's my second plan. Back in the 60s, I developed a weather-changing machine, which was in essence a sophisticated heat beam, which we called a laser. Using these lasers, we punch a hole in the protective layer around the world, which we call the ozone layer. Slowly but surely, ultraviolet rays would pour in, increasing the risk of skin cancer that is, unless the world pays us a hefty ransom.
That also already has happened.
Shit. Oh hell, let's just do what we always do. Hijack some nuclear weapons and hold the world hostage. Yeah? Good.
What's up, everybody? So I got some things to share with you that I've been researching, and in particular, there is an article online. Links will be in the description for not only the audio clips that I'm playing here from the Austin Powers movies, but also the online article and the clip from YouTube that they included in this online article. So this is from spectrum.ieee.org, and the title of the article is called "How We Reverse Engineered the Cuban Sonic Weapon Attack." And if you read through this article, you will see that they have a good idea of possibly what was going on, not necessarily what caused it. But at any rate, they collected some audio samples. And what I have here is the audio from the video embedded in this article. Again, links will be in the description so you can see them for yourself and go review them. So what I'm going to do is play for you the audio of this. Let's see. The clip is titled, if I can get this to pull up here.
This is the number one thing.
Of course, there's advertisements. Give me 1 second. So the clip is called What Americans Heard in Cuba Attacks, The Sound. So just keep that in mind. Now here's the audio from that recording of that video.
The recording gives us the first tangible sense of what it was like for these American government workers in Havana who were hearing these unexplained sounds in their residences and later developed physical symptoms. Americans who heard these sounds in Havana have described slightly different sounds, and even in some of the recordings that the AP has reviewed, there are slight variations. However, this high-pitched cricket sound seems to appear in all of them. The U.S. Embassy in Havana has played these recordings for Americans who are working there so they know what to listen to. These recordings have also been reviewed by people who heard the sounds firsthand in Cuba, and they confirm that the recordings are generally consistent with what they heard. We still don't know what is causing the sound, and the recordings don't appear to have significantly furthered the investigation. Even with the recordings being analyzed, the US government still says it has been unable to determine what is causing the sound.
You won't be hearing it, but of course it is going into your system. It's like acoustic hammer which is hitting you. You're just not able to hear it because its frequency is much higher. So there were some concerns to it, and if it is really, really high, it could create some, what we call as a bioeffects.
It's possible that what we're hearing on the recording is actually only part of the picture. Traditional recording devices are only able to pick up certain types of frequencies, such as the ones that the human ear can hear. It's possible there are additional frequencies, possibly those too low or too high to be picked up, that are also happening when these attacks occur.
Okay, so I want you to keep in mind, in case you're not aware, you can look through some of the comments on some of the recordings that I had taken of the noise from the property where this all originated or started for me in this experience. And one of the predominant comments, actually there's two predominant comments that were made by a lot of people. One of them was that I was the only one complaining about the noise or the disturbance, and the other comment was that all people could hear were crickets. Now, when I came across this article and this video that's embedded in this article, that was the one thing that stood out to me, is where they mentioned that the sound, and as you heard, and you can hear it again for yourself if you go take a look at that article or that the video on YouTube that's embedded in that article, it actually does sound like crickets. Not only it has a little bit of the chirping sound in the background, but it has the very high-pitched screeching sound. Now, keep in mind also, this is something that I have dealt with for some time. Longer than this low-frequency hum noise that I hear predominantly in my left ear, that which Crow from Crow777radio.com, the host there, also described that he is experiencing. And coincidentally, like I said, that screeching noise that they had played from that sample from Cuba is identical as I can tell to the pitch and tone of the sound that I hear along with this low-frequency humming sound, which I've identified as roughly a 60 hertz oscillation, though I'm not entirely sure if it's the sound that I'm hearing directly, or like I believe it was a doctor that mentioned towards the end of that embedded video, that the exposure to these frequencies, where I think he said, acting like a hammer essentially, can create bioeffects. So what I'm experiencing could, and it's plausible that what I'm experiencing is the bioeffects of the exposure to some of this technology that's been introduced into our society, into our neighborhoods, from various different organizations and, say, utility companies for that matter. Excuse me. So, interestingly enough, I came across this article when I was researching and looking into the fires out in Lahaina in Maui, and the connections there, and it's all too familiar to me, and so I felt compelled to make a recording of this and let you all know, just for your own knowledge, something for you to chew on, or not, like I said before. But keep in mind that even though a majority of the population isn't aware of things like this, most people aren't even aware about what happened down in Havana with this exposure, with these what they're calling attacks. But also, a lot of the information that I've shared, that I've come to realize, to know in my research, when comparing things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and even the wireless electric meter transmissions to things like a microwave oven. And what I found in my research is that the transmissions from these different devices are, for the most part, the same. There's some variances, but regardless of the variances, to my knowledge, they are all apparently in the microwave spectrum. So they all have the ability to have an effect, a biological effect, much like a microwave oven would if someone was to, if it were possible, be inside that microwave oven while it's turned on. I mean, you can only imagine the effects that would have. Of course, that's a lot higher power output than some of these exposures from things like, say, Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, or potentially even the wireless electric meters. But it just takes a simple device to test for the transmissions, which then identifies the exposure levels at different distances away from, or close to, if you will, the transmitting device, whether it be Wi-Fi router, a Bluetooth transmitter or receiver, or the wireless electric meter. So keep that in mind. This is something that I've tested myself. I've used some devices that I've purchased through various suppliers and tested for myself to see what the output of these particular devices is, or what level it's at, and if that is in fact potentially harmful exposure. So, just keep that in mind.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin phase 2 of our evil project. Or is it phase? I don't know phases. Anyways, this is the phase in which we put a giant laser on the moon. As you know, the moon rotates around the Earth like so. When the moon reaches its appropriate lunar alignment, it will destroy Washington, D.C. You see, I've turned the moon into what I like to call a Death Star. What?
Ah, nothing, Darth.
What did you call me?
No, nothing. Rip off!
Bless you. Anyways, the key to this plan is the giant laser. It was invented by the noted Cambridge physicist, Dr. Parsons. Therefore, we shall call it the Alan Parsons Project.
Oh my God.
What now?
The Alan Parsons Project is a progressive rock band in 1982. Why don't you just call it Operation Wang Chung, ass?
Well, what should we...
Nothing, I'm sure Operation Banana Ram will be huge.
What are you saying?
If you want... Trying to be hip.
www.shh.com.org.
You shh.
Dr. Evil, if we could put aside the family squabbling for a moment, I think we could get down to some serious business here.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't like that insolent tone.
I meant nothing by it.
No. You want to run things here?
No,
Is
not
that
at all.
Huh? You want to be daddy? Said it?
I
Number
didn't-
2, you want to wear the daddy pants? Huh? You gonna cry?
I
You gonna
don't
cry?
think so.
Huh? You gonna cry? You gonna cry? Huh?
What are you?
Huh? You gonna squirt some? You gonna cry? Huh? Yeah, see, you're gonna cry, huh? You're a big man now, huh? Yeah. Thought so.
So the reason why I play these clips is because, like I said, I was doing some research about the Lahaina fires, and things kind of started to make sense to me from a satirical, if that's the right word, a satire type of perspective. But if any of you all have been paying attention, there's a lot of things that happen in our society that just so happen to be foretold in movies and music and different media that's produced and that's essentially shown to the world, if you will. And it seems to me like it's a foreshadowing of what's to come, whereas these people that may be doing this seem to have, it's either a protocol or they're required to, or for whatever reason, they telegraph, if you will, what their plans are. Just like before 2019, there was the movie, I think it's called Outbreak, if I remember correct, or maybe Contagion. Maybe it was Contagion. off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly. It's been a few years since I watched the movie, but that movie, for the most part, telegraphed what happened from 2019, roughly late 2019 into 2020, with the so-called pandemic, which is very strange and ironic. But nonetheless, here's another situation where quite possibly the technology being introduced into our society, and specifically in that neighborhood where the property was located, where I first started to experience this, it's potentially possible, or it's possible that this technology was tested in Havana, Cuba, and that the diplomats and the people there that experienced this very similar experience that I'm experiencing currently and have been for a number of years now, may very well, like I said, been tested there, and in an attempt to determine maybe how hazardous it could be, or what have you, what the effects might be on people with the exposure. And so after that had happened in Cuba, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember what year that was. I think they mentioned it in that video. But let me just reference here. I don't know if it says in the article the exact time frame. It doesn't matter. You can look it up when that time frame was, but it looks like it might have been, no, it's 2017. It's an article. Anyhow, it may have been a foreshadowing, if you will, or a test to see how effective the technology would be, or to see how hazardous it might be to people before installing it, in our neighborhoods and around the schools and pretty much everywhere. And in my experience, especially when the electric company was switching over to the wireless mesh network system, installing these wireless electric meters onto the structures and homes and properties for electric usage, it's what I found out was that I didn't have a choice, even though they stated in their own policy that customers would have a choice whether to keep their old analog meter or switch over to the new one. It even, according to the Public Utility Commission of Ohio, and their statements that they put out regarding it, it showed that customers would have a choice, as well as the state law that outlined the implementation of this and the regulations outlining the implementation of these devices. It gave an exception and provided a choice for customers, that customers were supposed to have a choice, is what I'm driving at. But as I found out, I wasn't given a choice. Essentially, once I started sending letters noticing the electric company that I did not want the wireless electric meter, and I wanted to keep the old analog meter because it was working just fine, and I wanted to do some more research into the wireless meters to determine if there was any potential hazard from the exposure of the transmissions from the devices and how they work and such. But of course, I was very quickly forced at one point. As a matter of fact, the electric company sent some contractors out who failed to identify themselves. I believe, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure there's a recording of the interaction on this YouTube channel, from roughly, I'm trying to remember when that was. I want to say it was the fall of 2018. So maybe there wasn't, maybe I didn't upload that video. Anyways, regardless, I had an interaction with a couple of contractors that came out, and they ended up being escorted by Zanesville police. And so the police showed up to allow them to force this device onto the property. And if I was to intervene, they would essentially assault me or do what they had to do to prevent me from protecting that property from this type of device. Now, again, you do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. Don't believe what I'm saying. But if you look up the information, you will see that these devices have two-way communications. From my testing, I found that the one at that particular property was transmitting 900 megahertz as well as 2.4 gigahertz. And like I said, there may be some variances there where it might not be exactly 2.4 gigahertz. It may be like 2.45 or 2.35 or something like that to that effect. There might be a little bit of variance. But nonetheless, like I said, if you look at the general spectrum of microwave energy, those levels, specifically the 2.4 gigahertz levels, are well within the microwave spectrum. And so even if there are variances, they still have the ability to interact with tissue and especially with water molecules, because after doing some research, I found out that's exactly how microwave oven basically works. Is it wirelessly interacts with the water molecules, causing them to vibrate due to the exposure of the transmission, which is what the microwave oven does. It blasts 2.4 gigahertz into that box that's known as the microwave oven, and whatever is inside that box is exposed to this frequency, and the frequency causes the water molecules to get excited and to vibrate. That vibration causes friction because they rub together, with each other, as well as other tissues and other materials that they're around, and that friction causes heat, and the heat heats up the material, and that's essentially how the food or material is cooked, if you will, inside of the microwave oven. Now, it should go without saying, and it shouldn't take a whole lot of intelligence to realize that if the frequency can do it inside the microwave oven, it's a pretty good likelihood that it can do the same thing outside the microwave oven. Essentially, if you were to take the door off of the microwave oven and still be able to turn it on and stand in front of it, you would probably experience some of the similar effects, if you will, that I've been experiencing. And the most I think concerning about all of this, aside from the fact that I've been forced to be exposed to this, and I've been dealing with these effects, if you will, these bioeffects, as the gentleman stated towards the end of that embedded video of the article, that aside from the exposure, the medical community, the providers, so-called physicians, if you will, that they like to portray themselves as, they didn't want to pay attention. As I was experiencing these effects, side effects, if you will, and attempting to report them to the so-called providers, attempting to make sense of it, hoping that we could have a dialogue so that they would pay attention to the research that I was providing, the published research, by the way, regarding the exposure to this sort of technology, and to allow me to be able to glean some more information, and maybe they would have a little bit more to provide as far as knowledge and intelligence regarding these types of exposures and how they affect the physiological systems of the body. Unfortunately, what I found is that none of these providers, especially within the VA, primarily within the VA, they didn't want to talk about it. When I would bring up the issue, when I would bring up the situation, rather, even when I presented printed documents of the published information, evidencing what I was talking about from the published research, for them to consider, so that way we could have an educated discussion and dialogue about the situation and be able to fully comprehend what may actually be going on. They didn't want to have a conversation about it. When I would bring up the topic, most of them would kind of get glassy-eyed, and they would start staring at the ceiling, and then a little bit of drool would come out the corner of their mouth, and I would be concerned for their health, thinking they might be having a stroke. And so I'd ask them if they're okay, and then next thing I know, they're shrugging their shoulders and just waving their hands, saying, "I don't know what to tell you." And that was that. They wouldn't talk about it any further. all they would do is change the subject. Now, on top of that, the experience that I had is these providers not only not wanting to pay attention to me and my experience and what is plausible to be happening, but they improperly characterized my experience and these effects by giving an improper diagnosis. I'm sure many of you have heard the terms that are given for different diagnoses that people are given for, with hearing problems. And what's been purported from these providers is that, well, when you have hearing damage or you have damage to the inner ear or possibly the cochlea, it can cause people to hear sounds. But when you break it down, when you really think about it, at least when I did, when I really thought about it, I considered, how does hearing loss cause people to hear more? I mean, just think about that. How does hearing loss cause people to hear more? If the idea of tinnitus, or tinnitus, however you want to pronounce it, according to the official story or narrative, that damage to hearing causes ringing of the ears and other types of effects, if you will, with hearing because of damage. But it just simply doesn't make any sense. I mean, even just saying it, it kind of makes me laugh, because I'm thinking to myself, how can these providers that supposedly are educated, and swore an oath to essentially, do no harm or cause no harm, how could they turn a blind eye to this, and how could they mischaracterize it? But then I started to look at other things, and I won't go too far down this so-called rabbit hole, but I started to look at, cancer and other situations that the medical community seems to be profiting from, and that it isn't getting any better, as well as the mental health industry, behavioral health industry. I quickly came to realize in this experience and my research that it seemed that a lot of these effects, a lot of the exposure may very well be causing biological effects, bioeffects, just like the gentleman stated in the end of the embedded video. And that this is in line with published research that exposure can lead to biological effects. Now, if it could happen in this situation with wireless technology exposure transmissions, if you will, could it potentially be causing the cancer as well? I mean, we've been told for years, it's been researched and it's been published that microwave ovens are carcinogenic, and that standing too close to the microwave oven while it's operating, if you slam the door too hard and damage the seals, it can leak some of that so-called radiation and cause people to get sick. That's why there's warning labels on the boxes and the devices to notify people that it is potentially carcinogenic or is carcinogenic. I'm not sure the exact terminology off the top of my head, but you can look at it yourself. What I'm saying isn't too far-fetched when you, like I, do a little bit of research, consider the possibility, and realize that after everything that's happened, especially in the last couple of years, it seems that everywhere I turn, that there are technologies being used, whether it's a wireless device or a Teflon plant on the Ohio River, or trying to think of another example, microwave ovens that are potentially carcinogenic and have and can potentially cause biological effects. The writing's on the wall, and if you can't see it, then it just means that you're simply too incompetent or not intelligent enough to comprehend these concepts, because it's not very difficult to put two and two together and to connect the dots. I'm not saying 100% that this is what I'm experiencing. What I'm saying is it's very plausible, and that based on my experience, due to the fact that that screeching noise that you heard in the recording of the embedded video that was recorded from Havana, Cuba, is very, very close in pitch and tone to what I hear constantly. I can hear it right now as I'm speaking. That began years ago. And then in 2018, after the switch over to the wireless mesh network electric grid that the utility company forced onto the community, I began to experience this additional low frequency sound. And it could be one of two things, according to doctors' opinions, or researchers' opinions, if you will. I hate to use the word doctors. It could either be that what I'm hearing is simply due to the exposure. It's a bioeffect, possibly resonance, possibly, trying to think how to explain it, kind of like a short circuit, if you will, or not short circuit, what's a better word? The best way I can think to describe it is using an unshielded microphone cable near an electrical wire. If you've ever done sound technician work, you would know that using unshielded microphone cables near electrical wires causes all kinds of problems with the microphone output. Lots of, essentially the signal from the electrical wire bleeds into the unshielded cable and causes interference, and can create ground loops and other issues from the wireless exposure of the magnetic and electric fields coming off of the electrical wiring in the structure that the microphone cables and audio cables are closely in proximity to. So after everything is said and done, at this point, it would seem very, very plausible that what I'm experiencing is, like I said, some type of resonance, because of the fact that several times since this experience began in 2018, primarily, prior to that, I didn't notice any real change. And at the time, I wasn't even aware, prior to 2018, I wasn't aware of this sort of thing. And at the time, just ignorantly took the provider's word for it and thought that, well, hey, I got hearing damage. And it was evidenced by hearing exams. And that's what led to this quote-unquote ringing of the ears, is that the damage that was caused by my military service, which is causing me to hear these extra sounds that not everybody else can hear. So, but again, like I said, it doesn't make any sense when you break it down and think about it. How does damage to hearing, how does hearing loss cause people to hear more? It doesn't make any sense. So after going to an independent audiologist and getting a hearing exam done, I found quite eye-openingly that the results of the hearing exam from the independent audiologist did not show the same supposed damage or hearing loss that is assumed to be damage that was apparently found in the earlier hearing exams. And so that would tell me, if, according to the independent audiologist in that exam, based on their report, that I actually have decent hearing. And there was only slight, I guess they would call hearing loss, but it's really the sensitivity, because I was still able to hear the sounds. It just took me a few extra moments to realize that the sound was being played in the headset at the time, because of all this exposure and the constant sound that I hear these particular frequencies that I had, they showed as less sensitive or less sensitivity in my hearing, were very close in proximity to the sound, the pitch and tone of the sound that I hear constantly, that screeching, just like in the embedded video recording had the recording from Havana, Cuba. And it just completely blows my mind to even to talk about this, because I've been talking about it for years, and here at every step and turn I find more and more evidence supporting what I originally suspected, what I wanted to talk to the doctors about. It was my initial gut feeling and instinct was that this was what I was dealing with, but I didn't know how to properly articulate it, because at the time I was a lot more ignorant than I am now, and had not done enough research to be able to convey some of these concepts. And even still, I'm not an expert in the field, but anybody that may be would be able to understand what I'm talking about, because I'm not making this stuff up. I'm presenting information, and by all means, go yourself and look at. There's an article, or at least there used to be an article on EPA.gov website regarding electric and magnetic fields from power lines and the exposure, the effects. I can't remember the exact title of the article, but it's essentially, it has electric and magnetic fields from power lines in the title of the article. And it talks about how for decades, the scientific community, the medical community, has been aware that people living in close proximity to, say, high voltage power lines have developed cancer and other diseases due to the exposure. Now, is it possible that a majority of what we experience, these sicknesses, these diseases, these illnesses, if you will, is it possible that a majority of these are being caused by the exposure to wireless transmissions? Another thing that was extremely eye-opening to me was when I did a little bit of research into the Spanish flu. And from what I found, it seemed that the Spanish flu basically followed wherever at the time, the telegraph lines were being installed across the country. And again, this is just more supportive evidence, though it may be circumstantial, if you will. Nonetheless, it is supportive. And you can look up and do your own research. Again, don't believe what I'm saying. That's why I'm providing this information. That's why I'm putting it out there, so you can look it up yourself. You can do a little digging. You can go down a rabbit hole of your own and make your own determinations. But I just certainly hope that your determinations are based on facts and reality and not your own made-up narrative about the situation, because you don't agree with me and you want to silence my right to freely express myself, which is what I'm doing. Not only expressing myself for my own sake to essentially, if you will, get it off my chest, quote unquote, but also hopefully to put a bug in everyone's ears that's listening to this to consider these things. Because in a day and age where behavioral health and mental health is out of control, now more than ever, it's steadily getting worse. It's not getting better. I've had many talks with people in the behavioral health industry at various levels about these types of things and how these types of exposures could very well be creating problems for people. For example, it's very plausible and possible that children that are developing ADHD, or what they call ADHD, or those types of hyperactive disorders, is what they call them. It's quite possible that that's being caused by not only the exposure, because in young people they have a lot less shielding, if you will, in their body. Their bodies aren't as full of minerals as aged people. that have taken in a lot of toxins and other things, heavy metals and calcifying substances, like, from the way I understand it, what is it they put in the water? Fluoride. Being a neurotoxin, one of the side effects, according to research, is that it could potentially calcify the pineal gland. And it's quite possible that in these young people, because they haven't taken in as many of the toxins as more aged people, that they are more susceptible because they have less shielding. Like I was mentioning, the shielded cables, they can pick up ground loops and they can pick up interference from other wiring, electrical wiring and such throughout the structure that those audio cables are near. Much the same, our body can be affected in the same manner. After all, our bodies are electrical. And not to mention, according to science and the medical community, our bodies are like, 70, 80% water, or whatever the percentage is. It's a very high percentage. If I remember correctly, I want to say that they reporting like around 70%, like 73% water. So therefore, the areas of the body that are most water filled and have contact with the outside environment, or the air, if you will, to the water in those areas, like the eyes, the ears, the sinus cavity, the mouth, even the brain. There's very little shielding if, say, someone like detoxes or flushes the toxins out of their body, or these heavy metals or these materials that may provide some shielding. So is it also plausible that the powers that be, instead of creating safe and effective products, or making sure that corporations or companies or people working for companies rather are creating safe and effective technologies that aren't harmful to people, is it possible that they've implemented things like putting fluoride in the water and putting other toxins in the food, and heavy metals in the soil, and which get into the food and vegetables and so forth, and wheat, pesticides and other things? Is it possible that they've put those things in there to essentially shield the wires? Because as we consume these materials, these foods with these materials in them, they transfer into the body, and sometimes the body can't properly evacuate these heavy metals and toxins. They get stuck. And especially with most of the garbage from the processed foods and other things that we tend to eat these days, it's very plausible that, like I said, that there's this essentially building up of a shielding of the body, so that way they can start to implement these technologies. Now, it sounds very nefarious and it sounds a little far-fetched. I know even saying it, I kind of just wanting to stop myself, but that's why I put the clips of Austin Powers in there, because where he's talking about things like lasers and in one of the movies he was talking about sharks with lasers on their heads and all these things. It's presented in a comical manner, but is it possible that some of these wealthy, quote unquote, elite people are doing some of the things that were comically portrayed in the Austin Powers movies, like creating devices that can shoot lasers down that could potentially destroy specific areas or properties, if you will? It's pretty interesting, but nonetheless, the information is out there. There's published information. Something else that you may want to look up regarding this topic is what's known as an LRAD. It's an acronym. It's LRAD. It's Lima Romeo Alpha Delta, and it stands for Long Range Acoustic Device. Now, these are also known as DEW weapons, or DEWs, because DEW, D-E-W, or DEWS, DEWs is an acronym for Directed Energy Weapons Systems. So, if you look up those types of devices and weaponry, and you look up the published information about these, you will quickly realize that these types of devices were used reportedly in the Ferguson riots a couple years ago. There were police departments that used these types of devices for, it's called active denial systems, where they can essentially point the devices at a group of individuals or just a single, how should I say, a single being, a single life, and target them, even in the midst of a group of people. According to the findings, according to the published information about these types of devices, they can single out quote unquote individuals in a group and only affect the individuals and not the entire group. So it's more of an acute targeting system, which would be considered direct fire instead of indirect fire, if you will, if you're familiar with those terms. And from what's being purported is that police departments all around the country and even around the world are utilizing these technologies for crowd control and other things. Now, is it possible that back in around 2018, May or so, when I got this property, that because of the property and the so-called day and age that we live in, where what seems to be an agenda is to force people into tuna cans to live in. They want everybody in apartments, it seems, the smallest confined areas as possible. Look at the apartments in New York and so forth that are advertised, San Francisco, and even say places like China, where they have apartments that are like 100 square feet or 150 square feet or something ridiculous like that. Maybe even smaller now. I'm not entirely sure. But maybe because I, as a single living soul, got this property and relocated to the property, being that it was a large structure. Let's see, the house was around 5,200 square feet, 2 stories, had lots of room, and as well, it was on a half an acre of land with roughly a 3-car garage. And when I bought the place, or when I got the place, I thought, this is something that I could grow into. I didn't want to get a tuna can, and if, say, I met a woman that I wanted to maybe have a family with, or that she may want to have a family with me, or both, I guess. That I would have plenty of room to grow into, and that I could begin to develop a business. That was my initial intention by relocating out there, was to start a couple of businesses. I was considering starting a carpet cleaning business, and a couple of other service businesses to not only create quote-unquote jobs for people in the community, but also provide services for people in the community, because after relocating back to Ohio, I came to realize very quickly that people here just don't seem to really care about their surroundings. One thing I miss, and not to get too far off topic, but being out in Arizona, or on Arizona, I should say, for a number of years on the land, I love it. The smell after a fresh rain, it's very clean and crisp and very invigorating. Whereas here, in the many different places I've been, after a rain, it seems like it just smells like dog shit and sadness. And quite frankly, it's disturbing. I can't stand the smell of this place. So at some point, I'm looking to relocate. But anyways, that's not the point. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, and share it if you feel inclined. But by all means, do your own research. Now, like I said, I'm going to provide the links for the the audio clips, which are video recordings posted to YouTube of not only the Austin Powers clips that I played in here, but also the embedded video in that article. But I'll also include the link to that article, so that way you can go review it yourself. And if you want to go replay that embedded video, so you can hear it for yourself and also see what's presented visually along with the audio, by all means, I would definitely encourage that. That way you can, make your own determinations about what's possibly going on. And if you are experiencing anything like what I have been experiencing, I certainly encourage you to keep your head up and don't give up, because knowledge is power. And from what I've experienced, not only the more that I know, the more that they seem to not like it, but the more that I know, the less that they're able to do to me. The less opportunities they have to pull the wool over my eyes and pull a fast one or a trick to get me to allow them to, say, put me in a jail cell for almost 2 months until I'm so frightened for my safety and for my life and property that I feel like that there's really no other choice but to submit, because it's either submit or die. And though maybe it sounds cowardly to you, at the time I had animals to take care of, and my main concern was not letting those animals that I was responsible for starve or get dehydrated to a point to where they would expire. Because it seemed like these people that were putting me through all of this, these public servants from that area, didn't have a care about those animals or what their actions were potentially causing in my life, as far as a side effect, if you will. So again, the links will be in the description, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Take care.